Star Trek Beyond is the third movie in this newly rebooted J.J. Abrams series that they're nicknaming the Kelvin Timeline. And this is the first one that J.J. Abrams has stepped away from the director's chairs. Justin Lin has taken over directing duties. He's famous for the Fast and the Furious franchise. And this movie stars Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto, Zoe Saldana, Carl Urban, John Cho, Anton Yelchin, Simon Pegg, and Idris Elba. And this is also the first one to be co-wrote by Simon Pegg. And the basic premise of the Star Trek Beyond is the first leg of the USS Enterprise's 5-year mission takes them into uncharted territory. There, the Enterprise is nearly destroyed and strands Kirk and his crew on a remote planet with no means of communication. Kirk must then work with the elements to reunite his crew and get back to Earth. Now, I had two big questions coming into this movie. I'm a very casual Star Trek fan. You know, I'm a big Star Wars fan, but I've also grown up on Star Trek. My dad took me to see all the Next Generation movies. I've seen a few episodes of the series here and there. I've seen a few of the original Star Trek movies. And I'm a big fan of this J.J. Abrams series because it's a lot more mainstream, which some of the old school Star Trek fans don't like, but a lot of the newer generation really appreciates. You know, J.J. Abrams does a really good job at kind of mixing the old with the new. And it definitely proved that he was capable of rebooting Star Wars, which he just did. And, you know, I was a big fan of the first one. I was a big fan of Into the Darkness, which a lot of people didn't care for, especially the old school Star Trek fans. And my two biggest questions coming into Star Trek Beyond was, is Justin Lin going to be able to keep this momentum going? Am I going to miss J.J. Abrams in the director's chair? And is this going to be much more of a kind of an even mix? Is it going to satisfy the old school fans as much as it satisfies this new mainstream audience? And much to my surprise, guys, we have a really good Star Trek movie on our hands. Justin Lin did a damn good job directing this, and I think it satisfies everybody. You know, a lot of people coming from the new rebooted universe is going to enjoy it very much, and everybody who was an old school Star Trek fan that may not have gotten what they wanted from the first two, I think they're going to be much more at home with this one. You know, Justin Lin did a really good job directing this. I was worried that it was going to be like Star Trek Fast and the Furious, but it really felt like a Star Trek movie. And he brings his really good action directing to this, but he doesn't have his Fast and the Furious super over the top stamp on it. You know, it's very grounded. It's a very grounded sci-fi story, which I appreciate a lot. And you could tell that Simon Pegg and Doug Jung, the two co-writers, you could tell that they knew what the fans wanted, and that they could really tell. You could tell that they are fans themselves because they knew how to have that even mix. And like I said, it does have a really good mix of pleasing the new fans and the hardcore Star Trekkies. Now, one of the biggest things that shines in this newly rebooted Star Trek universe is that all the actors do an awesome job at playing the crew of the USS Enterprise. You know, Chris Pine does an awesome job as playing Captain Kirk. He never feels like he's just playing kind of like a impersonation of William Shatner. Zachary Quinto always does really good as Spock. You know, Zoe Saldana, I've always liked her and everything she does. Carl Urban is awesome as Bones. He's probably my favorite character. John Cho and Anton Yelchin, they don't get quite as much to do as the others, but they do a really good job in their spots. And Simon Pegg, you know, everybody loves Simon Pegg. He brings good to everything that he's in for the most part. And all the members of the crew, for the most part, have their good moments to shine in this. You know, obviously it follows Spock and Kirk for the most part, but, you know, I felt like Scotty had a lot more to do in this movie. I felt like Chekhov had a lot more to do in this movie. You know, Sulu probably got the short end of the stick as far as the entire main crew, but he did have a few moments to shine where he kind of had to get the ship working. And, you know, Uhura is really strong in this. She's not just a damsel in distress, which is cool, because usually when you have movies like this with like action franchise where they have a crew with one woman on it, she always ends up being, you know, the one that they have to go save. And that's not the case here, so that was really cool. And the villain played by Idris Elba, his name is Crawl. He was an interesting villain, and I liked, you know, the third act reveal of kind of his true origin. And, you know, I liked that how they kind of tied that in with, you know, Starfleet and everything. I thought that was really cool. And his motivations throughout the movie are a pretty cool parallel for Kirk's insecurities in this movie. You know, Kirk is kind of having trouble coping with the fact that he's now a year older than his father ever got to be. You know, his father passed away in the beginning of the very first movie, directed by J.J. Abrams. He was played by Chris Hemsworth. And, you know, he's kind of starting to have some insecurities about his place in the world, being that he's older than his father ever got to be. And Crawl's motivations and, you know, the reasons why he's doing the things that he's doing in the movie kind of has a nice little parallel there. And I really liked how Krall's army, like their fleet and their ships, I liked how they kind of designed that. It was something that was very different. You know, whenever they first kind of come across their enemy, it looks like this gigantic ship, and then all of a sudden all these little tiny miniature ships start swarming out of it, and they're really like a beehive, and it's really cool, and it was really unique, and it brought something that you don't really haven't seen in a Star Trek movie yet. So I like the ships for Krall and his army. And you know, obviously we've lost Leonard Nimoy before this movie was finished, and I thought that they had really, really classy tributes to Leonard Nimoy, and it felt very organic. It didn't feel like it was just shoehorned in there. You know, you had some scenes with Zachary Quinto playing the younger Spock, where he kind of has to reflect on Leonard Nimoy's Spock, and there's a nice little scene where he finds some of the older Spock's trinkets in this little case, and there's a picture of the old school cast with with George Takei and William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy, everybody standing together. That was really cool. And Jayla, who is pretty much like the alien on this planet that they're stuck on, who is on the side of the USS Enterprise, she was a really cool addition, and she was a pretty kick-ass character. She was played by, I forget the actress's name, but she's played by the woman who was walking around on those razor-sharp stilts on Kingsman, and a lot of the kind of the acrobatic fighting that she had in that movie she brings to this, so she was a really cool character. Being that Justin Lin was in the director's chair, the action, of course, is awesome. You know, the action and the special effects were really good in this, and I really like how they've really upped the action in these newer rebooted Star Trek movies. You know, Star Trek has always been more of kind of a thinking man's sci-fi. You know, the big difference between Star Wars and Star Trek, Star Wars is a lot more of a kind of a space fantasy. You know, there's a lot more fantasy elements to that, and it's more like a space opera to a degree. And Star Trek is always more of a heavy sci-fi, kind of a thinking man's, you know, scientific type sci-fi. And I think they do a really good job at keeping that, but also bringing a lot of the action and a lot of the, you know, the big set piece scenes and everything to kind of draw in the casual movie audience. So that was really good. And I like how the Enterprise, the USS Enterprise, the ship, continues to be its own character in this. You know, the only real ship that you walk away always loving from the Star Wars movies is the Millennium Falcon for the most part. And in all the Star Trek movies and the show and everything, the Enterprise is, you know, this big, and almost like its own living thing. You know, it's this big ship that houses all this entire crew, and the Enterprise always has its moments to shine in these new movies. So I really always like seeing the USS Enterprise. And to me, I picked up on a lot of spots in this movie where the music, it had a really classic series feel to it. Like, there's scenes where they're going in, like, where Bones and Spock are walking into a cave, and like, you know, the score kind of is in the background. It felt just like an old episode of the classic series, and that was really cool. And I think a lot of the old school fans are going to appreciate that. And sticking to music as well, you know, one of the things that a lot of people criticized to the first trailer, deservedly so, is that it looked like they were trying to shove new age music into it where it didn't belong. You know, they were playing Beastie Boys' Sabotage, and there's a scene in this movie where Sabotage does come in, but I thought it was really cool. And the way that they used it made sense, and it fit, and it didn't feel like a brick in the face, like it was just kind of shoehorned in there to kind of give a nod to the first movie and, you know, to make it more mainstream. It had a really cool use in the story. So that was cool too. Now, the movie's not perfect. There is a few things that I thought could have used some work. And as much as I was praising how interesting the villain played by Idris Elba was, to me, the villain, Krall, was really underdeveloped and underused. You know, his motivations, they kind of started making sense towards the very end of the movie whenever, you know, that third act reveal comes, which was cool. But throughout the movie, really, his motivations weren't really brought to life much. He's just kind of there, and you don't really get what his end game is and what he's really doing there. He's just kind of, like, you know, like I like to say, he's just evil for the sake of being evil for the most part for when the first 2/3 of this movie. And, you know, he has this ability to drain the life from other people, and it kind of rejuvenates him, but they needed a little bit more explanation on how he's able to do this. You know, it shows towards the end that he uses some sort of technology in this little captain's log, but you know, there's a scene where he literally just grabs two people by the neck and just drains the life of them, and you can't really tell. Like, it almost looks like he's, you know, like Darth Vader or something, like where he's just using it from his mind. But to me, that needed a little bit more explanation on how he's able to do that. And, you know, unfortunately for Idris Elba too, it's very hard to follow Khan as a villain. They had Khan as the villain as Star Trek Into Darkness, and Khan by far is the most famous Star Trek villain. And he is off to a little bit of a disadvantage trying to follow Khan. But after Inner Darkness, I felt like he was kind of a lesser villain in this movie. And really, honestly, at no point did I feel like the crew were really threatened. That their ship gets destroyed. I mean, absolutely obliterated, and they're put on this planet. But even when the ship's going down, and they're walking around this planet trying to see, and they don't even really know if anybody else survived, and I never really felt like they felt threatened. I mean, they always kind of had that lighthearted feel, like you knew they were going to get out of it. There was really no stakes to it. So the villain to me was a little bit of a weak point. And this is kind of a personal pet peeve, but I really wish in these newer Star Trek movies they had more of a lead-in into the next movie. I always enjoy them, but I wish there was, whether it be like a post-credit stinger, or if they just kind of left a few story threads there in the last 5 to 10 minutes to kind of give you an idea where the next movie's going. I never feel, as much as I enjoy the movie, I never feel like when I leave the theater I'm just foaming at the mouth for the next one. There's really no lead in. They've already announced that they're going to make another Star Trek movie, obviously, especially this one's, it's going to do really well financially, and it's doing really well critically as well. They're going to be doing a movie bringing back Chris Hemsworth's character as George Kirk, and he's going to be on an adventure with Captain Kirk. And to me, it would have made a lot of sense, because they've obviously planned this out, and they obviously knew they were going to be doing this for a while. It would have made a lot more sense to me if they had some kind of a stinger at the end, or just something like they found a captain's log or a transmission coming, and it was Chris Hemsworth's voice, just something they could have thrown in there really quick to kind of give you a little bit of a teaser for the next movie. So I kind of wish that this new series would start doing that. And I really wish that at some point they would get to the Klingons and the Borg, because I like the fact that one of the strengths that they've done with this new series, especially with the way that J.J. Abrams has set it up, with it being a new timeline, it's really genius that they can do pretty much whatever they want, and it'll make sense, and it's not going to conflict with the original series. So I like the fact that they're going in new directions. I don't believe that the alien race that is in this movie as the villains I think it's newly created. I don't believe it's from the show. So I like the fact that they do something new, but I'm a huge fan of the Klingons, and I'm a huge fan of the Borg. So I really wish that they would either make more appearances in these movies, or they would do a movie focused on them as the villains, because God, I want to see Justin Lin or J.J. Abrams' take on those villains. So like I said, those are just personal pet peeves, but that's something that I do wish that they would fix in going forward in this series. And one more thing that I do want to touch on, and I know this is going to be a little bit controversial. They came out with news right before this movie came out that, okay, in this movie they're finally going to establish that Sulu is a homosexual character. Because, George Takei has played Sulu in the original series and all the original movies, and George Takei is a homosexual. And they've made it where John Cho is going to portray him as a homosexual in this movie. And the big question for me going into this is, okay, is it going to feel organic? Is it going to feel like it's earned that he's revealed as a homosexual, or is it going to feel like it's just kind of shoehorned in there for the sake of saying that they've added a gay character to Star Trek? And honestly, I felt like it was absolutely pointless. All they do is when after they get back from their mission that kind of opens up the movie, everybody's getting off the ship and going to meet their family, and it shows a little 5-second thing where John Cho walks up to a man holding a daughter, and he gives his daughter a kiss, puts his hand on the guy's back, and they walk away. And it's like, oh, okay, so they didn't really beat you over the head with it. But I'm like, okay, where are they going to go with this? Is it going to be part of his storyline for this, this episode, for this installment of the series? Is he going to be like where his husband and his daughter are, what's trying to drive him to get back to this planet, and the crew can have interactions with him about the revelation that they never really knew that he was gay, and they could have done something good with it to bring it into the storyline, but they didn't. They just kind of showed that scene, and they showed a scene later on with at the end of the movie when everybody's back together again after everything is back to normal. They have like a party for Kirk's birthday, and it shows John Cho standing next to his husband again, but it was pointless to me. It made absolutely no sense to put that in there if they weren't going to use it to drive the story at all. It would have made much more sense to me, as much as I love the character of Jayla, They could have made her, a lesbian character where she has, like, her lover is stuck inside this little prison that Crawl has. They could have had, there's a character that kind of leads the USS Enterprise into this predicament where she puts out this distress signal, and they go to rescue her before their ship gets obliterated. And there's a little back and forth where you're not sure if she's good or she's bad. And they could have made it where because ultimately her motivation for drawing them in is that she has, her crew has been imprisoned by Crawl. They could have made it right there where, okay, this character is a lesbian character or a gay character, and her lover is getting, is imprisoned by Crawl. They could have done it, like I said in one of my previous movie news episodes. If they're gonna put a gay character into Star Trek, or if they're gonna put it into anything, a Marvel movie, a Disney movie, have a point to it, because to me it just makes absolutely no sense to just throw it in there just for the sake of saying, well, we gave you what you wanted. Because there's a big clamoring controversy nowadays where people are demanding more diversity in movies, and they're absolutely right. You should have more diversity in movies. You should have more diverse races. You should have more diverse backgrounds, and you should have more diverse sexualities. But there should be a point for it. To me, it would be like, if I was gay, it would be offensive to me that they're just going to throw it in there just to say, okay, well, we gave you what you wanted. It would serve absolutely no purpose in the story whatsoever. So that's just, I'll stop talking about that because I don't want the whole review to be about that. But to me, that was just, it was pointless, and they took it absolutely nowhere. So anybody that had any questions on where that was going, to me, it went absolutely nowhere. As far as my rating for this guy, if you are a hardcore Star Trek fan, absolutely go see it in the theaters. If you are a hardcore fan of this newly rebooted J.J. Abrams series, absolutely go see it in theaters. If you have not yet kind of jumped on the Star Trek train, I know that Star Trek kind of has a lot of ties to what people consider geek culture. Do not let that geek crap scare you away from enjoying what is out there. Definitely go pick up one of these newly rebooted Star Trek movies and watch the first two, and then go see this in theaters, because this is an action spectacle sci-fi movie that definitely needs to be seen on the big screen. So Star Trek Beyond is awesome, guys. Go give it a shot, and I guarantee you will not be disappointed. It is a great, great movie. All right, guys, that about does it for this review. Thank you, as always, for listening to the Cody Leach podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe below. Leave any comments or questions you have below on SoundCloud, below this post on Facebook, or you can find me on Twitter using the hashtag #TheCodyLeachPodcast.